just want to start by acknowledging that the University of Melbourne acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we work, learn and live in the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people. And we recognise the unique place held by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the original owners and custodians of the land and waterways across the Australian continent, with histories of continuous connection dating back more than 60,000 years. And we also acknowledge their enduring cultural practices of caring for country, which is, I think, particularly important when we're dealing with any issues around heritage in Australia. And we pay respects to elders past, present and future and acknowledge the importance of Indigenous knowledge in the Academy. So I'm Professor Hannah Louis, for those of you who don't know me, one of 3 directors of ACAHUCH, which is the Australian Centre for Architectural History and Urban and Cultural Heritage, with Professor Philip Goad, who's here, and Professor Julie Willis, who couldn't make it today. And I think it's great to see people here today. ACAHUCH essentially is a university centre, and we have an advisory board. And this advisory board is made up of experts and leaders in their field. And we're really fortunate to have the support and the wisdom of this group. And this year we've been running for around 3 years, and so we had a sort of refreshing of the board with a number of new members. So we thought it would be really excellent timing for us to hear about sort of their knowledge and their careers. And we did this once before, which was really great. And particularly because ACAHUCH is very closely linked with the Masters of Urban and Cultural Heritage, which I think there's a number of students here. And I know Stuart was keen to promote it to students. So that's been great. Because we really see the training of the next generation of professionals is incredibly important. So that's really the purpose of today's event. So I think we have to be very swift on timing, because we've got 4 speakers, each going to speak for 10 minutes. And first we're going to hear from Felicity Watson. Felicity is the Coordinator of Heritage and Strategic Planning and Property at Wyndham City Council. I have to get that right, because for years Felicity was with the National Trust, but she's now moved to other pastures. So Felicity, are you all okay? You can hear us? And
yes, thank you, Hannah. I'm good to go.
Great. Okay, so I'll so 10 minutes, go.
Great. I've just started my timer. So speaking of pastures, thank you for accommodating me on Zoom today. I'm actually out in Werribee at Wyndham City Council's offices, which is why I couldn't join you in Parkville today. But on that note, I'd really encourage you to look further afield to areas of Victoria and Melbourne that you might not be familiar with in terms of job opportunities, because there are lots of really exciting places to discover around this area. But that's not what I'm here to talk to you about today. I'm going to talk to you briefly about my career and some lessons that I've learnt along the way. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I will just share my screen to show you. Okay, it's not letting me show you that screen.
I'll just get Theo.
No, I'm just trying to find the screen that's got my LinkedIn. Oh, got it. Okay, great. So I'm just sharing my LinkedIn with you, and feel free to add me on LinkedIn if you want to, just to take you through a bit of a potted history of my career. So what I thought I was going to do when I finished school, which was in the year 2000, so quite a long time ago now, is that I thought I was going to become a journalist, and that I was going to study media studies, and that's sort of what I had geared myself up to do. But something unexpected happened, and when I was doing my gap year, I needed to get a job, and I happened to get a job at Godwin Mackay Logan Heritage Consultants, now known as GML Heritage Consultants, as an office junior. And that really opened up a world to me that I didn't know existed. So for all of you, heritage is something that's familiar. But for me, as a high school graduate, it wasn't an area that I was aware was a career option. So starting in a really junior role at a place like that was an amazing place to meet leaders in that profession and also get experience in different types of heritage work. So working with heritage architects, archaeologists, interpretation specialists, industrial archaeologists, historians, working in a kind of junior role in a place like that provided me with lots of opportunities to see what's out there. And so very quickly, I decided to change my career trajectory to do something in heritage. And as you can see from my LinkedIn, I worked at GML for a very long time. And at that age, it kind of felt like forever. And it was a really incredible sort of formative experience for me. But I worked my way up from more administrative roles to become a research assistant and then a consultant. And I was really lucky that GML really supported my career aspirations and really fostered my development within that environment. Having worked in consultancy for a long period of time, I also was interested in trying out different things. And something that I've continued to be really interested in is communication and how we can communicate with communities about heritage and history. So I moved on to a role at the Dictionary of Sydney, which is an online encyclopedia about Sydney, and worked with them to launch that back in around 2010-11. And I also took on some kind of freelance roles as well, like working for the History Council of New South Wales on administrative tasks and marketing for History Week. So throughout the time that I was sort of working in heritage and figuring out what I wanted to do, I always looked out for what opportunities there were out there. And something I really tried to do was to keep an open mind about opportunities and to utilize sort of roles like this as an opportunity to see what's out there and also to gain experience and broaden my networks. So I guess my key takeaway for that part of my career was to start at the bottom and put my hand up for everything. So not just focusing on professional or specialised skills relating to heritage, but also things like proofreading, editing, photography, website design. All of those things are super valuable no matter where you go. And another thing that was really important for me was volunteering. So volunteering with professional and peak bodies like Interpretation Australia, Australia ICAMOS, the Planning Institute of Australia, the Professional Historians Association. They're all organisations that I've been involved in over the years that have provided me with an opportunity to build my skills and networks and also give something back to the profession that I care about. Something I would also say has really worked for me is going with my interests and values. So something that I've worked out along the way is that I'm really more of a generalist than a specialist, and to see the value in that. So I'm never going to be an expert in lime mortar or stone restoration, but what my superpower is and what my skill is knowing a little bit about a lot of different things and being able to join all of those pieces up together and to talk to the experts that I need to know information about their area of expertise and get their input and feed that back into the bigger picture and the strategic picture. So that's something that has really led me to my role in local government. I'm really passionate about community, and so those values really drove the work that I did with the National Trust, and that's something that I've continued in my role at council. But to sort of wrap up this really kind of speed overview of my life, something I really want to talk about is when things don't work out, because in life, things don't always follow a straight line, and there are often really big obstacles that present themselves. And I think it's really important to be able to accept that and to show self-compassion in navigating those challenges. And for me, something that I experienced sort of in the middle of my sort of early career was that I needed to take a career break to look after my mental health. And I experienced challenges because of that, and was actually diagnosed with a complex mental illness. And that really derailed my career aspirations, which at the time was something that was really distressing. And I want to talk about that because 3 in 5 Australians experience mental health issues within their lifetimes. So chances are there's someone in this room who can relate to this or know someone who has experienced this. And I guess going through that period of my life taught me to really understand what I value and to live life in accordance with those values, but also that taking care of myself was a really valid way of moving forward. And this is something that a lot of people that I work with now probably don't know about me, because it's not something that impacts my daily life in the way that it used to. So it's probably news to some of the people I know that are listening to this today. But I have actually written about this, and if it's something that you're interested in reading to, I guess, find out a little bit more about that experience and what I learned from that experience, I've just dropped a link into the chat, and Theo can share that with you all. But I guess I've only got 12 seconds left, so I can't really go into too much detail about this. But I guess what I want people to take away from this is that things don't always go as you expect. You have to take things as they come, and be kind to yourself, and seek support if you need it. And those experiences of adversity, whether it's mental health, physical health, or something else, can really help you to grow as a person and enrich your life experience. So if you need to take a career break, or you need some time out, or you feel like you can't live up to your own expectations, give yourself the space to just sit with that and do what you need to do. And it's not something that's a career limiting experience. It's something that is difficult to get through, but you can get through. So I think I'll wrap up there.
Thanks, Christy. That was really valuable, I think, insights and generosity and words of wisdom. So, but also the thing of being open, but also making sure you know what your values and interests are, so that you're sort of navigating, those opportunities. So I think that's really helpful, and that link we'll put up. I think that's part of the Parlour series.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which is a great group, particularly for women in the built environment.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to move on, and then we're going to have a quick break in the middle. There's a sandwich there, and then we've got time for some discussion and so on. I don't know, Felicity, you're going to stay online, or? I
might stay online till the break.
Yeah. That's okay. Right. So we're going to swap the order. I think next is going to be Suzanne, Zahra. Right,
Zahra,
I think,
that's
yep, Associate Principal at Lovell, Chen. And
I'm meant to go there. Or
Can you go here so that we can record you?
sorry.
Yeah.
A bit formal. That's what they don't.
You can be relaxed up there.
Okay. That's what they don't teach you at architecture school. Endless lectins. Thank you, everyone. I'll just put that down there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As Hannah has said, I am a member of the board of ACAHUCH. I've just a recently joined member. I'm an associate principal at Lovell Chen. I'm a registered architect, and I can say that if you asked my younger self, my very much younger self, where I would be, I wouldn't have said that I'll be, you know, a heritage consultant in a major heritage practice in Melbourne. Wasn't my anticipated trajectory at all. I studied at RMIT a very, very long time ago. It's not a course that's known for its heritage overview, lesser than Melbourne was at the time, but I did study under some really wonderful practitioners and teachers and educators, including Harriet Edquist and Karen Burns. And, you know, while history was never my favourite thing, I really loved working with them and some of the more senior staff, Doug Evans, in terms of our exposure to history, the history of architecture in Australia. And that has really kind of underpinned the way of my, you know, in hindsight, my career trajectory over the last very long time. I won't put numbers to my years. And I think the thing to say is that an architecture degree provides quite limitless opportunities. I think don't feel that you come out with an architecture degree and need to be the architect. There are so many opportunities. You will do many diverse things with your learning from your course. And I think really, and picking up with what Felicity had said, they're really follow your path, follow your interests and see what skills you learn within the course and where they will take you. But as I said, I started them a long time ago doing my architecture degree at RMIT. I've done no further formal qualifications through masters and the like in terms of heritage specialisation. I've worked in a very, very small practice with a sole practicing woman architect, undergrad and post-graduation. And that meant riding around the inner northern suburbs of Melbourne with my drawings on my back, talking to builders, learning about construction, and working primarily in buildings that were, you know, late 19th century, early 20th century, and up to interwar building stock. This is your arena primarily in your early heritage work opportunities. So I think, you know, it's amazing when hindsight is a great teacher and what you sort of can join the threads through your career. As I said, those projects were primarily residential, new builds and alterations and additions. We had an interesting mix of building typologies. And one of the things that has really struck me is that I had an early exposure to two very unusual construction types, two concrete buildings, experimental concrete residences, one in Williamstown and one in Northcote or North Fitzroy. And that's an exposure to a materiality that I still, and you'll see the link, that I still work with today. So all these little kind of threads joining together in terms of my work, the materials we're working in, and my interest in working concrete construction issues, which is something I work with today. So, but one of the interesting things, when you're working in architectural practice, you do have to deal in the real world. And so I had exposure to heritage advisors. I had exposure to working with planning schemes, even in a practice that was just dealing with alterations, additions and new work. I remember standing on one of our project sites with a heritage advisor with a very poorly built foam core model, but standing there saying, this is my model of this, you know, Victorian house, this is the addition, we've considered the sight lines, this is the depth of the site, this is the broader context. It's the work I still do today, less with the foam core model, so, and more about advising people. But you can sort of see that your undergraduate experience and your postgrad experience can really lead to a long-standing sort of body of knowledge in your workplace. I guess in thinking about the work that we did at that practice, not specifically Borough Charter, but very much aligned with the thinking around the Borough Charter and what you do when you're trying to conserve and manage and care for heritage places. My second and the most important position in my heritage career was with Heritage Victoria. So I joined as a graduate architect in the graduate program. It was very immersive and a massive exposure to heritage practice. I worked with Borough Charter, I worked on registrations, I worked with Philip on an appeal very early on in my career, which was a really fantastic hard bit of work. Heritage assessments, heritage registration studies, and learning on the job. A lot of what we do is iterative, it's empirical, we just learn on the job. You will walk out with a degree, you will have really excellent underpinnings for your future career, but be open to learning and applying your skills and knowledge and gaining more knowledge and learning from the people that you're working with. But working with Heritage Victoria led me to, learning to how to make decisions, and really hard decisions around heritage, how to do an assessment, not think just like an architect, not just think about reading the plans and thinking about the impact of that, but thinking about what the issues around values, heritage values were, significance are, what are all those things that play into understanding heritage. After a short bit of time with Heritage Victoria in their graduate program, because that is a limited time program, I worked at a small practice, another specifically heritage consultancy practice. Again, heritage advice, conservation work, design advice. It was in that practice that I spent a lot of time being a heritage advisor for a number of municipal councils. So I worked at the City of Melbourne for 8 years, and that's engagement with the public, that's engagement with owners and learning how to negotiate proposals and skills and negotiate with professionals that you're working with within council, and advocating for heritage. And advocating for heritage is one of the number of considerations in decision making at those places. I've been with Lovell Chen for 11 years now, which seems like an awfully long time, but it's true. And I think once you move into a bigger practice, your exposure to projects on a much larger scale and your application of skills. I've learned so much more about railways and rail and road infrastructure in the last 11 years. Wouldn't have thought I knew about trains, but that's where my architecture degree has led me. But that's a really fantastic position to be in. And again, exposing, growing my knowledge, applying, thinking, trying hard. I have to say, the reason I have some very scrappy notes and no presentation for you today is that I've just come back from what is the pinnacle of my career. And, in terms of a vocational highlight, this is the peak. I've literally stepped off the plane yesterday morning from just over 2 weeks in Los Angeles. I was one of an inaugural team of 26 people who were selected for their Conserving Modern Architecture initiative. So under a program that they've just started, we have spent 10 weeks prior to that doing online coursework. I was up at midnight most Fridays doing online live sessions, all the things you learn. I haven't done that for a very long time. It's been very hard going back to being a student, but again, really immersive, working with other people who are on our board. Sheridan Burke was one of the assessors and educators, Susan McDonald, ex-Australians who work internationally. And being part of the Getty course exposed me to a wider international network of other practitioners in the field, be they planners, architects, people working at NGOs, conservators, but with a focus on modern heritage. And so learning about understanding how to support, conserve, protect modern heritage internationally and in our own context, seeing how Australia punches above its weight totally in the heritage arena. We have the Borough Charter that is a absolutely worldwide guide to the management of heritage practice, and seeing other practitioners from our country work really hard and develop other tools for the management of heritage practice, including the 20th century heritage framework for looking at concrete conservation. So, and getting to look at lots of really fantastic buildings in LA, incredibly immersive. So, I come today totally excited because I've just been reinvigorated in my career. I'm not saying it's been boring, but there are some things that get a bit tedious in the everyday part of our practice, but that's an absolute career highlight, as a mid-career professional with a vision for the next 20 plus years of my career. And, that's about education that I can bring back to yourselves and through ACAHUCH and through the universities and through our professional organisations like ACAHUCH to, again, spread learning and knowledge. So that's a very short, I don't know how I've run on my 10 minutes, but that's a, pretty big overview of a long career in heritage. And still not a star architect, but I have a really interesting job and do really fun things.
Okay. Great. All right. So our next speaker is Roger Beeston, Roger Beeston Architects and Conservation Specialist. And again, we're really, really glad to have Roger's expertise involved in ACAHUCH now. And I know we've had associations, and you've had long associations with the faculty in various ways. So great to hear from you.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. I've met quite a number of you before. I think, would that be right, in my guest lecture recently?
Yes.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
I think, firstly, just an observation about this course. I think I can say that my understanding of at least the aspirations of the ACAHUCH course are that it is one of the premier such courses globally, and I can't stress enough how impressed I am with what I understand to be the gamut and the aspirations of the course. And I bring that comment with, I guess, visibility of similar such courses, both within Australia and also internationally. And that's not just simply because I come from this faculty either. So that's, I guess, the beginning. I am a graduate of this faculty. I am a registered architect, came through in the mid-80s, got registered in 1990. And I think similar to Suzanne's story, at the time that I was studying here, I didn't really have any cognizance of a profession or a subset of the profession being involved with conservation or heritage. But nonetheless, I guess a combination of two things, exposure to people like George Tibbets and Miles Lewis and Hugh O'Neill and Jeff Turnbull. These are very prominent academics that were peak of their powers, I guess, when I was coming through, who left a lasting impression on me about the value of an engagement as an architect in history and in heritage. That combined with, and Philip's going to be bemused by this comment, that combined with the very strong design thrust, if I could put it that way, which left me completely and utterly baffled. We're in the middle of the postmodern period, and I found the whole design part of the education, I was bewildered by it, and I felt that was another impetus, I think, to become a heritage architect. I felt I needed to know more about the history of architecture in order to be a good practicing architect, I suppose, in summary, yes. I'm a little bit nervous about talking about myself, so I'll quickly move on. So on the screen here, we have a photograph of the Maryborough railway station, which we spent about 10 years conserving Maryborough in central Victoria, an amazing structure. Mark Twain went here and was sort of amused by it. He said, pardon my American accent, he said, this is not a town with a railway station attached. This is a railway station with a town attached, because it is such a huge, enormous thing. But 10 years of work, lots of forensic building fabric analysis. For example, the lovely color of the render that goes with the brickwork there, that is a new skim coat that was, the recipe of which was derived from taking samples of the original skim coat and sending them to a materials scientist, and he coming back and saying, well, in fact, what you've got here is not just your regular lime and sanded cement. We've actually found ox blood, and we've found fool's gold in the mix. This is absolutely fascinating. And we weren't able to get any more ox blood. We could get some fool's gold because this is Maryborough in the central goldfields. But I think it's just an example of one of the many incredibly fascinating things that arises on a daily basis, I guess, when you're working as a conservation architect. Currently, I am a heritage advisor to the City of Melbourne, have been there for 10 or 11 years. I'm also deputy chair of a group called Oz Heritage. Oz Heritage is an organisation consisting of about 20 or 30, a network, I'm sorry, consisting of about 20 or 30 organisations around Australia. Melbourne University is one of those via the Grimwade, Robin Sloggett and her team over there. along with other institutions such as the National Maritime Museum. Very interesting organization in that it's very cross-disciplinary, and I think this is a fascinating thing for a conservation architect to be immersed in an organization like this. I think as distinct from ICAMOS, I'll perhaps come back to that point later, but AusHeritage provides a professional opportunity for me to engage with, I guess, paraprofessionals, whether they be social historians from Gordon Mackay Logan in Sydney, National Maritime Museum, etc. And essentially, AusHeritage is an organisation, a network designed to export Australian conservation expertise into the rest of the world, particularly the Asia Pacific region. And I would urge many of you here, all of you here, to investigate AusHeritage as part of your career development. As I said before, very honoured to be a member of the ACAHUCH Advisory Board. And finally, I'm the founder of RBA Architects and Conservation Consultants. We turn 30 next year. As for Suzanne, I began my career with Peter Lovell. I left Melbourne University thinking I was going to be an urban designer. I went to Sydney and helped to do the master plan for the first iteration of Darling Harbour, and then got the call from Peter Lovell, and I got a bit homesick, and Peter, who I met in India, that hence the shot here of an Indian temple. I met Peter in India on an archaeological dig, and John Gollings was there and a whole lot of other prominent Australians. And I then worked for Peter for 7 years, effectively did an apprenticeship is how I think of it. And then he kicked me out of the nest in 1994. He said, that's it, you've got to go out on your own. And so that's what I did. RBA, we like to think of ourselves quite seriously. We are a laboratory, not a workplace. We are involved in the business broadly of conserving built heritage, and we have three, I guess, key interconnected areas of expertise as per that image there: architecture, conservation, and heritage. To become a conservation architect, it's a long route. You do your 5 years of studying architecture, then you really need to begin your apprenticeship thereafter. And I think it's no different to being a regular architect. Really, they say it takes at least 15 years of being immersed in the business of architecture before you reach a basic level of competency. And I think similarly, to be a conservation architect, it takes that long. I won't go through that list. We have the three teams. We have a group of about 6 heritage consultants. Most of them are historians, and what they do is the reading and the writing, if you like. They research the stories of a heritage asset, describe that in succinct terms, and help develop policy for the appropriate conservation of that asset. A couple of images there. The bottom image is a cell and wardroom design in a cemetery. We help to provide guidance there. So, we as conservationists are not simply there trying to preserve old things and keep them looking old. We are also engaged very much in the modern world, and much of our work is indeed involved in allowing heritage assets to be reborn and to be reimagined, brought up to code and things so that they have a relevancy in the modern world. The conservation side of things, as I emphasized earlier with Maryborough, it's fascinating because it's so, this word facetiously, so sciencey. We get involved in science of building materials, and I personally love that. We work with material scientists, we work with a whole range of other specialists, but obviously you as the generalist, Felicity, I think, made that point before. I think of myself as a generalist conservation architect. There are so many areas of the business that one can specialize in, and the Getty, for example, I also came through that course a couple of years ago.
This is a new.
I know it's a new course, but I share your enthusiasm. I came back from the Getty 3 years ago after having done a shorter version of that course. Absolutely inspired in the Getty as a place, not just promoting, I guess, an engagement with the business of the conservation of mid-20th century modernist architecture, but also very much this business of engagement with the science of building fabric and how to understand its evolution, the effect of it in the environment, and then of course what you might do in terms of conservation interventions. And I guess that is an emphasis on, the Borough Charter principle. We are very careful with our interventions. There's a lot of technology out there, all sorts of high-tech solutions for dealing with problems with old buildings, but I have a bit of an adage, and I say, a low-tech solution demands a low-tech solution, not a high-tech solution. And so, understanding the science of building fabric is very, very, very important. And thirdly, we are regular architects as well. It's just that the regular form of architecture we're involved in. Adaptive reuse is a much used term, and often I meet young people who have a little bit of an interest or that sort of started to understand what we do, and I ask them, well, what part of the business you're interested in? It's all the same answer is always adaptive reuse because it's kind of glamorous, but it's significant. It's definitely a core part of what we do, but there's a lot more to the business of being a conservation architect than just adaptive reuse. A lot of our work, we work, and I think the last question or point that I was asked to deal with was to do with collaborations. I'm sure you all recognise this image. This is the facade of the former bank, West Bank, Bank of New South Wales, from Collins Street, that was moved up to Melbourne University, is now part of the faculty, the western elevation, and indeed this Japanese room. My firm worked on both the Japanese room and this facade, along with John Wardle, in collaboration to develop, I guess, the broader faculty, and that was a fascinating exercise, because I think contemporary architects like John Wardle, they're not just seeing these components as dry sort of artifacts that are just sort of appended to their magnificent new edifice. Good contemporary architects who we work with, they engage with us in unraveling the meaning of these assets, these artifacts, and trying to weave the old story in with the new. And finally, this is a brand new project. This is a restaurant in the former stock exchange in Collins Street, which is laid idle, unused for I think something like 40 years. It's also known as the Cathedral Room. We've just spent the last couple of years working with a very eminent firm of architects, contemporary architects from Sydney, Atelier Atkin, helping to sensitively insert this new French restaurant into this space, which highly sensitive space and very, very challenging to actually make a restaurant work in a space like this. But I urge you all to save up your pennies and go there, because it's absolutely magnificent. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Roger. And I think from both Roger and Suzanne, it's sort of interesting, one, how multidisciplinary the heritage professions is, science and technology and history, but also that most of the people who are leading practitioners have come at it very organically, because there wasn't the formal training that there is now, and a lot of you are undergoing. But there's sort of many ways to become a professional, and that's what's sort of very interesting about this area. So we're going to move to our last speaker, and then we'll have time for some discussion. It may just be also informal rather than around this table, because you might want to come up and talk to the speakers themselves. So, but just to say that ACAHUCH is not just about architecture and heritage, it's very much about history, but architectural history, but cultural history. And so we have very strong links with both institutions in Melbourne, also other faculties, and I know we've got another board member sitting over there, Dr. Jane Eckert, who's in fine art and has come to us with that set of expertise. And Deb Tout-Smith, who is Senior Curator at Museums Victoria, and you've been on our board for 2 terms now. And we're very appreciative of that. And I know we've had students, particularly in the Much program, some have come from a more curatorial ambition, and they might have studied curatorial studies, they might have studied the Greenway in a more conservation material sense. So it's really fantastic to have Deb involved. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And I have to say, I have had a long career in museums, and in spite of that, I still like to use notes. And one of the things I've learned in a long career is just do what works for you. And everyone is a little bit different.
Yep.
And
No,
what works. Here's me in the collection store at Melbourne Museum. I've worked in museums for more than 30 years, mostly as a curator, and I absolutely love my work. And I'm going to give you a shortened version of my career journey to give you a sense of what I do, how I got there, and just a sort of maybe a few tips like our colleagues have also shared along the way. Like most of you, I've always been passionate about the past, and for as long as I can remember, I wanted to be an archaeologist. So as you can see, I'm not one. So like Felicity and others, I think none of our journeys are exactly what any of us imagined. For me, I was a pretty good student, but year 12 when I did it, the results were entirely based on exams, and I was really not good at exams. So instead of getting into Melbourne Uni archaeology, I went to La Trobe and did history, sociology and prehistory, which for me actually was a far better path for me as it turned out. Prehistory was a really great grounding in deep human time, and it was a pathway to archaeology. But I then found I needed a really good science and maths brain, which I don't really have. So off that went. I loved sociology and the way it sort of unpicks and delves into and understands past societies as well as present societies in new ways. So I found that was a really good grounding. But it was history and the quality of the history lecturers and the history subjects for me, particularly European history at that stage, which I found most engaging. There was a sense of, for me, listening to people who no longer had voices or who were never heard at the time. So the deeper past rather than recent or contemporary history is what really appealed to me. And in fact, so deep in time that when I did honours in history, I looked at food in 17th century England and food practices. So not really the best grounding for work in Australian museums, but it started to focus me on cultural practices and also material culture. And I found myself increasingly drawn to the things and places that people lived amongst and made and had left as legacies and what they said about those people. Since I was young, I've also had a great passion for museums, and the more I progressed through my history degree and honours degree, I began to sense that museums were actually a fantastic fit for me. And so I also began as a volunteer, like Felicity and others, at Museums Victoria, and I was simply describing new items as they came into the collection. But after I finished honours, I decided to do a Masters in Public History at Monash Uni, as it was then, which is a fantastic grounding in presenting history to all sorts of public audiences. Fortunately, that particular course isn't available, but there's equivalent public history courses, fortunately. And my master's thesis was actually a commissioned history of Burnham Beeches, which some of you may know was the streamlined modern mansion built by Alfred Nicholas, which by then was a private hotel. So I felt really privileged to be able to have full access to the site to do essentially a social and cultural history of that site. And the other thing is, as a student, and I hope some of you have had this experience of sort of picking up small related research jobs and that sort of thing. And I got work at the National Centre for Australian Studies at Monash Uni, which was then undertaking research into museums for the Heritage Collections Working Group, which was auspiced by the Cultural Ministers' Council. And we surveyed museums across southern states of Australia in particular, which is a really groundbreaking national program to understand museums and their needs as they were in the 1990s. And I also got some contract work with the Australian Science Archives project, which later became part of the Scholarship Research Centre, which later became part of, whoops, it's gone. And it's a tragedy that the Scholarship Research Centre has closed, and it really, for me, underlines the importance of sustainable models for collections and for knowledge. And this is the place that I sit in museums, gathering, preserving future knowledge and understanding the past for future generations. Around the same time when I was finishing my master's, I got a few short-term curatorial contracts at Museums Victoria in the history department. It's pretty much the case still, as you've heard, that our careers generally start with short contracts, often not ideal roles, but they get you in the door and they get you known. In the later 1990s, earlier 1990s, there was a wave of entry-level positions at Museums Victoria, and that is something we don't unfortunately often see these days, but there are increasing opportunities for internships and other very short-term contracts. So we're really, really always looking for those opportunities for emerging professionals. But the other important thing for me early career is being willing to move to where the work was. And I think you've seen this in other accounts as well. You know, think regionally, think nationally, even beyond for those first roles. So my first ongoing role as a curator was at the Western Australian Museum, where I had 5 wonderful years as a curator and learned to curate large and small exhibitions, how to manage collections and that sort of thing. And after that time, I spent several years in the United States and Canada working as a collection registrar at the Ohio History Centre. And then I was an adjunct professor in the University of Alberta's Human Ecology section, which managed a fantastic collection of clothing and textiles. And then I was an honorary registrar at San Diego Museum of Art as well, before coming back to Melbourne and back to Museums Victoria. I've really, really been attracted to working for larger organisations, and I think that's just a personality thing. Because some of you will be much more attracted to working for much smaller firms where you have much more agency. But one of the things for me is that large museums tend to include large heritage or historic buildings as part of their responsibility. So I've been really fortunate to do some research and interpretation at historic sites like the Fremantle Asylum and the Old Perth Jail. I was on the Fremantle Prison Interpretation Committee. And lately I've been doing some research at the Royal Exhibition Building. So it's been a wonderful and diverse opportunity. I've been at Museums Victoria now for more than 2 decades, and again, I'm not going to say exactly how long, but it is quite a while. But it's such a wonderful job. Here I am, and so I curate or co-curate home and community collections, military history, childhood, and clothing and textiles. So a very, very disparate range, but again suits the spread of my interests. I just wanted to show you a few pictures of the work that I do, and I'm hoping that it works perfectly. This first slide shows, for those of you who hadn't had a chance to visit any of Museums Victoria's stores, this one's at Marybeck. This is one of our large object stores. On the left, there's a corner of a Wirraway plane from World War II, 1944 Wirraway, and then there's a Richmond No. 1 cable tram from the late 19th century. And you can see sort of the high racks, early flight machines. The picture on the left is one of our entomology stores, so you can't see the detail, but there's lots of very tiny, sad little pinned insects. On the right, more positively, is part of our little archaeological collection, and some of those boxes are labelled bones, as in it's the food collection, so it's mainly animal bones in that particular view. Another of my passions, clothing and textiles. And there's just 3 views inside our clothing and textile store at Marybeck. And I had to include this one, but it's terribly hard to see. It's a beautiful late 1960s cape by an Italian immigrant designer, Madame Serini. And she did this really fantastic, wacky, way out there space age garments. And I was able to bring several of those into the collection. And just a view of some of our military history collections. We do have a particular collection of uniform jackets for historical reasons that I don't always understand. But anyway, it is useful for particular researchers. However, my particular interest in the First World War allows me to focus more deeply into stories and talking about the sorts of material we loved or collections we loved to receive. We actually at auction purchased that little Fordite suitcase, and it was full of First World War and just post-First World War personal items. And it was this little sort of time capsule, a treasure trove of some persons memorialising their First World War experience and their life just post-war. And we believe this is the person here we put together the collection, Barney Ward, or Michael Ward as he was, who served in World War I and came back, and we've pieced together something of his post-war life as a gardener living in Bentley. And then the story is of him later in life as a sort of an angry and bitter old man whose life had been a disappointment to him. But on a happier note, here's me having fun in the store, holding a World War II era knitted cat, a homemade cat, a little First World War diary actually, and some wax tapers, so the little candle lighters. Just a sort of sense of the mix of material in our collection. And talking of projects that we're most proud of, the World War I Love and Sorrow exhibition from 2014 to 2018 was the project that I'm most proud of, and it told the stories of, it followed the stories of 8 people who, with their families, lived through the First World War and then into the post-war years and what war does to people in a realistic and very graphic way. And we worked with families to gather those stories together. It was very poignant exhibition, and it received a lot of international attention. We had a brilliant team putting it together as well. So that's the sort of richness and depth and rethinking of the past that an opportunity like being a curator can bring. Just a couple of other fun projects that I've done. That's me in the middle of the MCG in 2006 remember when we once had a Commonwealth Games? Well, it was a fairly successful one, but actually our work focused on the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games as a creative project. How is it that these giant things are put together? And so we actually tracked the creative teams as they came up with the concepts, they wrote the music, they costumed all the characters that Prince Philip found really rather ghastly when he saw it. However, we thought the whole experience was brilliant. And so here's me in the MCG during the process of sort of documenting the flying tram and testing the cables and that sort of thing. Up at the top right there, me with John Brumby, who was then Premier, and our CEO, Patrick Green, at the opening of the Melbourne Story way back in 2008, which is now under redevelopment after a long time, but it was a very well received exhibition. And here's me at the closing, at the bottom right, at the closing of the Love and Sorrow exhibition, in which we actually brought the families back together to remember and think of the longer term legacies of the war. Talking of the exhibition building, one of the projects which I've recently been working on and worked on during the pandemic was actually gathering the few remaining voices of people who served in the Second World War, which during the Second World War, the Royal Exhibition Building was sort of commissioned by the Royal Australian Air Force and the WAFL, so as essentially a barracks. But for a World Heritage Site, this is a part of the history of this major building in Australian architectural history that is actually remains fairly undocumented. So I've just included a link there, but Theo can share that link as well. But we're able to gather together some of the stories with the help of a fantastic team of filmmakers to sort of retell some of those stories, but there's a lot deeper research that needs to happen. And there's a fantastic collection of objects found in the late 90s underneath the REB floorboards during a repair and restoration project of the floorboards. And during the war, the men's station there had stuffed all sorts of bits of detritus down between the floorboards. So there's like this extraordinary moment, this ephemera, the material that was never supposed to have survived, giving us a really fascinating insight, including letters into a world which we thought was now inaccessible. So it's a really exciting and ongoing project as well. And that was funded by the Department of Premier and Cabinet to mark the 75 years since the end of World War II. And Gatherer Media were the filmmakers who put those together. So they're really, really worth watching those. And amongst the people I talked to at the lower left, the wonderful Paula Hines, whose father was with the RAF stationed in the exhibition buildings during World War II. And there are just a couple of other pictures of me working with community, and community engagement is a really strong and important part of working as a curator. And it's something it's really good to love to do because we have so much richness and depth from the stories that the public bring in, but also I suppose these days, in days of decolonisation, we think about shared voices and shared ownership and shared stories. So in a sense, I'm you know, a facilitator of that engagement in those stories. You see, oh, there's just a few. That's well, once again, share those links for some of the other works that I've done. During lockdown, I co-edited a book on one of our museum pioneers, Martin Hallett, who we sadly lost a few years ago, who was one of the forefronts of museum digitisation and databases and interpretation and engagement from the 70s to the 2000s. So those sorts of, you know, remembering and recording our own profession is also part of what we do. So I think in terms, just to quickly summarise, in terms of what I've learned from this sort of long process, aim to be what interests you the most. Your own personal passion will be the most energising thing that you could possibly bring to a role or to a career. And coming across as passionate and dedicated can make a huge difference. And certainly you need to work hard, and I think you need to work harder than anyone you see around you, but the passion and bringing that obviously is incredibly important. And the other thing which some of our other speakers have touched on also is treating every professional opportunity as if it's a dream job, even if it's a volunteer role or an internship role or something like that. The other really important things, particularly for the museum industry, which is relatively small, is to network and become known, and I can't emphasise that enough. So joining professional associations like the Australian Museums and Galleries Association or the International Council of Museums, go to conferences, social events, introduce yourself to interesting speakers, offer yourself as a speaker or panellist, and you know, all of these associations really welcome emerging professionals. I think that's incredibly important. Don't be overawed by people who've had a lot of experience. We also need and want new voices and new perspectives as well. I particularly emphasise the International Council of Museums. If you're doing any sort of travelling at all or want any sort of international perspective at all, it's incredibly important to start making those connections. I should say I sit on the executive board of the International Council of Museums, which is based in Paris, so we're the world governing body of museums. And I can say without hesitation that it is an exciting time in terms of resourcing, in terms of networking, in terms of engagement. And there are specialist international committees to join. There's the national committees. We have ICOM Australia, and we have wonderful grants that these committees can apply for to work on specialist projects of all sorts related to museums. So I encourage you really, really strongly to think about that. And I'll just go back to a couple of other points. Again, be prepared to move for your job, for your dream job. Consider working overseas as well. And there's some really good internship programs and opportunities in overseas museums. The Smithsonian, for instance, has a really long-term ongoing program for paid internships and a really as I understand, open to international applicants as well. I've done quite a bit of overseas work, and I think perspectives and the networks and communities that helps you engage with is incredibly important too. So I would, say if you can spread your wings and take that chance, then that's likely to be extremely beneficial to you. And to finish, if any of you would like to connect with me afterwards, I'd be very happy to pass on my details, and we can sort of look at opportunities in the museum to start some of these pathways for you. So thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Deb. I think there's a lot to take away, I think, from those talks, and we're also lucky to have students who are from international locations. So we're, making the most of those international connections while you're here and with your fellow students is really important. And I think all the speakers too have kept up research and learning in their own careers, and we like to hope that you can take advantage of that while you're doing your degree here. There's always talks, and ACAHUCH is always doing things. And just on that, a couple of things to plug. One is you might consider an elective, doing an internship or placement, which at the moment I'm coordinating, of which people have done internships. So I think with a lot of all of you, I think, and find that incredibly valuable. So to think about that. We've also, Philip, do you want to talk about your symposium, the annual symposium?
Oh, yes. On November the 3rd, the ACAHUCH Symposium is called Prefab and Precut. It's about prefabrication post-war, where I've gathered a series of speakers who are focusing on government being the agent to provide more housing. In a way, it's mirroring the problems of the housing crisis now. And so I've got papers from people across Australia to look at prefabs in the snowy, prefabs for Aboriginal communities in remote Australia, prefabs in South Australia, the Housing Commission there, houses imported from Sweden, from the UK, and also from Italy, and those Italian manufacturers of houses also exported to Africa. So that's a paper by Anoma Pieris and a colleague from Calabria. So it promises to be a really interesting day, and in a way a mirror of our current situation, where government in the late 40s, early 50s were importing thousands of houses, and enough of that, I can keep going.
Well, and speaking of moaning about the present, we also have another faculty symposium at the end of November that's called Retrofit this year, where someone from the faculty, so it's very broad and multidisciplinary, but this is from a group that is sort of in all sorts of ways looking at retrofit. And I think Philip and I are going to run the ACAHUCH session, which is going to be a bit of a pushback on the current plans for the University of Melbourne's estate plan, which seems to be wanting to demolish half the campus. So, literally.
Not retiring.
Yeah.
Retiring.
Their word is they're retiring.
Yes. So, so I think that's enough for the formal proceedings, but the speakers have just got 5 seconds to hang around. If any of you want to say hello, and we'll be recording. We are recording and putting these up at work. So these will be up as a resource. And yeah, so thanks again for incredibly inspiring talks. Really great. Thank you.